there's a very precious jewel. Okay, and so those are the 20 kinds of identity view. Maybe different people have different inclinations to one or another of these views. So I sometimes think that, like, maybe athletes who are very much concerned about having a strong, powerful body, or fashion models, or beauty queens who are very much concerned about physical beauty. For them, there's a very strong identification with the body as self. Then other types of people, very much attached to their feelings, maybe very sensitive to pain and strongly addicted to pleasant feelings. Maybe like gourmets who like to eat very delicious foods. Maybe very sensitive, I don't know, maybe you could help me fill these out. Then we have the perception. Maybe this would be the artist, a painter, photographer who's very concerned to get very splendid pictures by finding the exact scene for a photograph. Yeah, I think musicians seem to hover somewhere between perception and feeling, because I'd say that the feeling component in music is more is prominent. At least it used to be. Now when you get to things like rap and hip hop and heavy metal rock, it seems what's prominent has become volition to drive people crazy. Okay, then with the aggregate of volitional activities, that would be the kind of person, setting up my business. I'm going to be a success in business, going to build up the company, make it really powerful, buy out this competitor, that competitor, make my mark on the world. Or the aspiring politician who first runs in local elections, wins the local elections and runs in the state elections, then goes into the national elections, then before long he is running for congressman, senator, president, or he becomes cabinet member, somebody who's going to impose his will and shape the world according to his will. Then how about the aggregate of consciousness? That's a good idea. Yeah. You could think like the very astute philosophers, the thinkers. Yeah, even though the idea is to get free from identification, but one wants to experience maybe altered states of consciousness, higher states of consciousness. Or I remember in the 1960s, didn't we have something called the consciousness movement? You got to change your consciousness, man. Take a couple of these, smoke a little of that. Okay, so this is identity view. And then identity view, the aim of the Buddha's teaching, at least one of the aims, is to get free from identity view. And at what stage, how does one get free from identity view? At what point does one get free from identity view? Completely.
Becoming a stream entry?
Yeah, exactly. It's that we call the first breakthrough to the Dharma. That is the stage of stream entry, that one sees into the truth of anatta, the truth of selflessness. And so by seeing selflessness very clearly, then one cuts off even the subtlest trace of identity view. And so identity view, if you remember the 10 fetters, the 10 bonds that keep us in bondage to samsara, the first of the 10 fetters is identity view, or Sakkaya Ditthi. And so with the breakthrough to the truth of the Dhamma, then one eradicates identity view, so that one can never identify any of the 5 aggregates explicitly as being myself. But even the stream enterer, the once returner, the non-returner, still have a kind of subtle clinging to the 5 aggregates, even taking them sort of spontaneously to be I and mine, though they won't build upon those ideas of I and mine to think that the 5 aggregates are myself. Okay, so this is actually what is meant in the next paragraph on how identity view does not come to be. That is, it's with the attainment of the first stage of awakening, the stage of stream enterer, that one becomes completely free from any kind of identity view. Okay, then the monk asked the Buddha, what is the gratification, danger, and escape in the case of each of the 5 aggregates? And then the Buddha, for all of them, he gives basically the same answer, that the pleasure and joy that arise in dependence on material form and so on, that is the gratification in the case of material form, and so on. So the fact that any of these 5 aggregates can function as the basis for pleasure, physical, bodily pleasure, or joy, mental pleasure, delight, happiness, exaltation, that is the enjoyment or gratification in them. And that gratification, that is the basis for clinging to them. So we cling to the aggregate, hold to it, become attached to it because of the pleasure and joy that arise from it. Then what is the danger, the drawback, the disadvantage in each of the 5 aggregates? And the answer is that each of the aggregates is impermanent, and then it's suffering, maybe here it isn't the right word, it's dukkha in the sense of being unsatisfactory. That is, it can't give true, permanent satisfaction. So it's impermanent, it's unsatisfactory or deficient, and it's subject to change. That is, subject to disagreeable change, change in the direction of deterioration, decay. And so that is the dissatisfaction, or what's the word that I use? The danger in the case of the 5 aggregates. And so it's by turning our attention away from the gratification to the danger or disadvantage in the five aggregates, that one develops detachment from them, that one moves in the direction of nibbida, viraga, vimutti, that is in the direction of disenchantment, dispassion, and liberation from the five aggregates. And then the third question is, what is the escape, or maybe the release, the outlet from the five aggregates? And then the Buddha answers that it is the removal of desire and lust, the abandoning of desire and lust to the five aggregates. That is the escape, the release, the outlet from the five aggregates. So the movement, there's actually, I call this like a three-step process, a three-step process of development. So we move from considering the gratification or enjoyment to the in the five aggregates, to reflection on the danger in the five aggregates. And this is a kind of meditation. You know, the meditation is not only observing one's breath, observing the sensations in the body, but it also involves some degree of reflection or sustained systematic examination of the danger in the five aggregates. For example, in bodily form, you know, we think, well, we have the body when it's young and strong and healthy, then we can enjoy, you know, wonderful sights through the eye. We want to go to, you know, I haven't been to the Grand Canyon, I want to see it. I want to go to Niagara Falls and see it. I want to go to visit Los Angeles or Europe or China, Japan, to see everything. And then one wants to enjoy with all the pleasures through the senses. And that way one gets gratification. But then, even if one is young, one can reflect that this body will grow old, it falls sick, it's subject to decay, to many types of illnesses. And so one reflects on the danger in material form, then there will come some distancing from the body, some disenchantment with the body. And it's through that reflection on the danger in the five aggregates that one begins to move away from them, to remove the desire and attachment to them. Okay, so this is the questionnaire on gratification, danger, and escape. Then section 13, we come to the question, how does one know, how does one see, so that in regard to this body and its consciousness and all external signs, or we could say more clearly, all external objects, there is no I-making, mind-making, and underlying tendency to conceit. So this is the way to eliminate what I would call notions of subjectivity or notions related to the sense of self. That is, the notions regarded to a sense of self take the form of I-making, mind-making, and the tendency to conceit. So we can say that I-making This is the, we could say, the mental process by which one constructs the idea of an I, of a real self, and then builds up notions of I based on that sense of self. So I-making, we could say, is identical to a view of self, or the view of a real I. An I which in some way is separate from the five aggregates, or identical with them, or possesses them, and so on. Then there's mind-making. Like this is generally the work of craving. Because when you have craving, then you want to sort of extend the idea of what one possesses ever more widely and bring everything with it that's possible into the scope of mind. And then there's the tendency to conceit. This is generally referring first, at the first level, to the conceit. I am. And then on the basis of conceit, one starts comparing oneself to others and measuring oneself in relation to others. Thinking I'm better than he is, I am equal on the same level as this one or that one. Or else in Buddhism we have the notion of the inferiority conceit. That is, oh, I'm not as good as them. Why does it always happen to me? I should just give up. It's pointless to try to do anything or accomplish anything. Everything I try, it just gets screwed up. I seem to have been born with a heavy load on my back. That's the kind of inferiority conceit. So a lot of people actually have that. Particularly in America, where we're always sort of given through this Hollywood these images of the ideal. The ideal hero is the tough guy with strong, who could lick anybody in the neighborhood. And then the ideal woman is the one who has, particular blonde hair or sparkling blue eyes, big breasts, hourglass figure. And so then people, men and women, rate themselves against the ideal types, and then they feel that they are losers. And then also we have the standard of success. You have to be a success. And then if you don't measure up, then you feel miserable. Okay, so he's asking, how does one eliminate this I-making, mind-making, and tendency to conceit? Okay, and then the Buddha explains or answers with this is sort of the standard meditation on anatta, on non-self. So whatever kind of material form there is, whether past, present, or future. Wow. Typographical mistake I never noticed before. It just says whether past or present. It should be three. It should be past, present, or future. Okay, so anyway, so he says, any kind of material form, whatever, whether past, present, or future, internal or external, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, far or near, one sees all material form as it actually is with samapaññāya, with correct wisdom. Thus, this is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. Any kind of feeling whatever, any kind of perception whatever, any kind of mental formations whatever, any kind of consciousness whatever, whether past, present, or future, internal or external, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, far or near, one sees all consciousness as it actually is with correct wisdom. Thus, this is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. It is when one knows and sees thus that in regard to this body with its consciousness and all external objects, there is no I-making through this view of self, no constructing the idea of a real, essential, substantial I. There is no mind-making, no craving to get more and more things and stamp on them the label. This is the property of Bhikkhu Bodhi. Anybody who touches it will be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. And there will be no tendency to conceit, no thinking, I'm the best, number one, or I am just as good as they are. And no thinking, what a miserable failure I am, never as good as anybody else. So this is extremely practical, extremely useful reflection. You know, if you do your meditation every day and you take this, first writing it out and reading it silently to yourself at the end of your meditation, don't think that you're losing your meditation time, wasting it on reading. But this is actually a practice that is starting to wear away the I-making, mind-making, and tendency to conceit. So when you do this, it's like using sandpaper. You want to make something smooth, or you want to get rid of a bump. You know, you've made out of some lumber, you've made maybe a table, but there are still some bumps on the table and you want to make the surface smooth. So you take a piece of sandpaper and rub the surface of the table, and little by little, with each rubbing, you're removing those bumps till the surface becomes smooth. And so when you do this analytical or reflective contemplation on non-self, you're helping to sort of wear away or cut away the idea of self or the grasping of I and mine. Or again, it's like you want to cut down a tree or chop down a tree. It's like you take a hatchet, an axe, and you chop at the bottom of the tree, the lower part of the trunk, and as you're chopping, chips of wood are falling away until you reach a point where enough wood has been chopped away, and then you just have to give a little push to the tree and it comes tumbling down. And so when you do this, you sort of, little by little, you are wearing away all the mental tendencies or the defilements that revolve around the ideas of I and mine, and you are paving the road to the penetration of selflessness. And this also comes in very handy in day-to-day life, because when you do this contemplation, sometimes people praise you, and if your mind isn't trained, then you get proud. They said I gave a very interesting class today, or else they blame you. You look out at the audience, and a few people in the back are and then you get upset. I'm giving such a boring class. I must be such a boring speaker. I must be such a boring person. I. But if you do this regularly, you go on speaking the same, whether everybody is looking interested and taking notes, or everybody in the room is just lying there. No difference. Or else sometimes you get what you want, if you're doing business, you succeed, get a raise, get a promotion. So instead of getting proud because of that, of course you accept it, but you take it in stride. And then I hope it doesn't happen, but if you get laid off from the job, then again you can take it, just as due to conditions. That's the nature of the economy now. It doesn't mean I have to blame myself and sort of beat and whip myself for getting laid off. And if you get very sick, like sometimes this is the case with myself, that I have sometimes this head pain condition, which sometimes becomes really just so painful that all I can do is just lie down or sit in the armchair. And often I've used this reflection that whatever feeling arises, whether painful or pleasant, it's just not mine, not I, not myself. So if you get really ill, you could bring in that reflection. And then maybe the most important of all is when you're lying on your deathbed, if you're clinging to the idea, I'm going to die, I won't be here anymore, I, then there comes great fear or stress or grief, anxiety. But if you just sort of turn back and reflect, the 5 aggregates, not mine, not I, not myself, then you can just let them go. Just like the Buddha uses a simile in one of the other suttas. It's like, he was speaking in Jeta's Grove Monastery, when some of the wood gatherers come and they take the fallen branches and logs from the woods, and they remove them from the grounds of the monastery. You don't think they're taking me away, they're removing I. They're removing myself. But they're just removing pieces of fallen wood. And so you could look at the 5 aggregates in the same way, even at the time of death. If you want to find out whether or not it works, when I die, then you can come and ask me. Okay, so while the Buddha was speaking in this way, then it says that a certain monk who was sitting there in the audience gave rise to this thought. He thought, material form is not self, feeling, perception, volitions, consciousness is not self. What self then will the actions done by the not self affect? So this monk, it seems, was clinging to some view of a self separate from the 5 aggregates. So he could see that, or at least he would accept that the 5 aggregates are not self. But still, because of his strong clinging, he believed that there must be some self that is existing now and that will reap the results of the karma done by the not self. Okay, so while the Buddha was speaking, then he understood the thought in the mind of this monk, and then he said, it's possible that, here he speaks rather strongly, I think, that some misguided man who is obtuse and ignorant, with his mind dominated by craving or in the grip of craving, might think he can outstrip the teaching of the master thus by raising that question. And then the Buddha says, now monks, haven't you been trained by me through interrogation or question on various occasions in regard to various matters? And then the Buddha, now he's taking the monks in a kind of sequential way through the 3 characteristics. Instead of hitting directly on non-self, he proceeds through the 3 characteristics, from impermanence to suffering, and then to non-self. And then he brings in again that we come to paragraph 16. Again, he brings in that same passage, and here we have it correctly. Any kind of material form, whatever, whether past, future, or present, any kind of feeling, perception, volitions, consciousness, all consciousness should be seen as it really is, with proper wisdom. This is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. So that is the insight into non-self. Seeing thus, the well-instructed noble disciple becomes disenchanted with form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, consciousness. When he's dispassionate, when he's disenchanted, he becomes dispassionate. When he's dispassionate, his mind is liberated. And when it's liberated, there comes the knowledge of liberation. And he knows the round of rebirths has been finished. The spiritual life has been lived. What had to be done has been done. There is no more coming back to any state of being. And so that ends the statement by the Buddha, but then the sutta adds, or the narrative adds another event that took place. It says that the monks were satisfied and delighted in the Buddha's words, and while the discourse was being spoken, through not clinging, 60 monks liberated their minds from the asavas through not clinging. So we usually get that statement when the Buddha gives a very powerful discourse. And so here, with 60 monks who were sitting there, as they were listening to the Buddha, reflecting on his words, they applied his teaching to their own experience, and right on the spot, they achieved arhatship, the liberation of the mind from the defilements. Okay, we won't have time for questions in this session, but we'll break for lunch now, and if you have questions, please come back after lunch and then we can discuss the questions. Okay, so let us end with the sharing of the merits. Okay, so we share the merits with the devas, the nagas, the bhutas, wishing them to be well and happy and free from harm and suffering. Akasata chabumata adeva naga mahitika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu sasanang. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahitika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanang. Akasata chabumata Deva naga mahitika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu mang parang. Etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe devanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe bhutanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe satanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Bhavagopadaya vichihetato etantare satakai upapana rupi arupi cha asanya sanino dukkha pamuchantu pusantu nibbutting. Okay, before we end, I want to mention first that we won't have a class next week because I'll be going to hear the Dalai Lama give lectures in New York City. Then the week after that, I'm sorry, but we won't have a class because I'll be joining the BGR walk in Connecticut. And then the week after that also, I'm really sorry, but we won't have a class because then I'll be joining the walk in New York City. And while I mention this, I also want to mention that for the walk in New York City, we need a few volunteers to help with the walk. And if any of you are free that day and can come for the walk, please also volunteer to help with some of the roles. Would be like, we call them the shepherds or marshals, to make sure everybody is walking at an even pace, helping to man like the desk where people register, some other jobs.
What date is that date?
Excuse me?
What date?
This is November 2nd. It's a Saturday. And the registration begins at 9:30 or even earlier, 9:15 a.m. And the whole walk procedure continues. After the walking, then we have a little ceremony with some talks, or actually we have a little just concluding ceremony to share the merits. Then we have a lunch, and then after the lunch, some talks, Dharma talks. And this is a way by which our organization, Buddhist Global Relief, raises funding to sponsor our projects through the next fiscal year of basically supporting different projects that will relieve hunger and malnutrition around the world. So if you are free that day and would like to serve in some capacity, which is I should also say, is a great source of merit, you can speak to either Johnny or Sandy here. And I emphasize the point that we do need some volunteers. So any kind of help will be welcomed. Okay, so let us end with the bows to the Buddha, 3 half bows.